Welcome to Habitat Forum's 56th episode of Rethinking Indian City webinar series. And before I hand over to today's panelists, allow me to set the context within which the webinars are placed. INHAF's webinar series, Rethinking Indian City, was conceptualized in June 2020. At the time, it was a response to the pandemic, a generally reflective frame of mind and the virtual mode of working most of us moved into. Many of us did not need COVID-19 to realize that India's urban systems are faltering and our cities are not in good health, whether it is environment or water or sanitation or governance or finance or slums or sustainability or mobility. It is a seemingly endless list depending on where one starts and what the vantage point is. The proposed webinars are seen as opening the much needed societal dialogue on how we handle urbanization processes and develop cities so that they remain engines of economic growth minus the exploitative instinct and damaging traits such as carbon footprint. The goal is to aim for economically productive, socially just, politically participatory, environmentally sustainable, and culturally vibrant cities. Technologically adaptive while being people centric too. The webinar series is therefore, in part, a response to the challenge facing us all. It feeds into an initiative known as CITURI, that is Citizens Urban Initiative. This is a multi-level and multidisciplinary effort initiated by INHAF and spearheaded by urban professionals, development thinkers and practitioners to work on a blueprint that outlines the country's response to complex urban challenge. This initiative hopes to achieve three things. First is to reassess India's urban challenge. The second is to rethink the Indian city. And the third is to reformulate the response in the context of national development challenges. With the accelerating pace of climate change, disasters, technology, and economic processes, the time for action is now and not in an unknown future. But how do we handle urbanization so that we reap the benefits of cities as centers of economic growth and aspiration without the exploitative instincts and inequities that seem equally present? That is, in part, one of the many questions INHAF's webinar series hopes to open up for discussion. Till date, more than 180 local and international organizations have partnered with INHAF to organize 55 webinars, and close to 250 urban professionals, youth, civil society organizations, government agencies have shared their perspectives on multiple urban themes. This process itself enables us to map people and resources that strengthen this initiative to build a supporting constituency through working together and sharing for wider ownership. Today's webinar brings together an expert panel to discuss an important aspect of sanitation, that is, inclusion of wastewater treatment for funding for cities with a population of less than 1 lakh under the current Swachh Bharat mission and the prospects and challenges. With that, let me hand over the session to Natasha Patel, CEO, India Sanitation Coalition. Over to you, Natasha.
Thank you, Sunil, and a very warm welcome to all of you there who are listening to us today. Cities are a very, very important aspect in terms of not just us, but a lot of our friends who also live in these cities. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the aspirations for urban India and what we at ISC actually believe in terms of the future. So I'm sure all Indians have, who live in urban India have asked themselves many times why their city was built so haphazardly, while at the same time blaming it on the government's inability to create a proper town plan supported by adequate civic facilities for the citizen. In actual fact, post-independence, the government of India set up the Town Planning Organization in 1955 to formulate the first master plan for Delhi. This task they completed in September 1962. And in the meanwhile, they also set up another organization called the Center for Central Regional and Urban Planning Organization, or CRUPO, to advise on matters related to urban and regional planning work in partnership with the central ministries, planning commissions, state governments, local bodies, and public undertakings. The mission of TCPO, which was an amalgamation of TPO and CRUPO, set up in 1962, is to facilitate sustainable and inclusive human settlement planning in India, facilitate, strengthen, and provide innovative ideas and strategies to create and promote methodology for achieving integrated and sustainable growth and regional planning and development for the country. So one asks the question, what went wrong? Why do Indian cities resemble jigsaws, which get more and more complex and appear to grow like mushrooms with no real planning? Let's do a quick fact check what is intended versus the reality. The NUFP 2020, or National Urban Policy Framework, was a document brought out by MAHUA, which is the Ministry of Urban Housing and Development, and it states that India is one among the largest urban systems in the world, with 377 million people residing in urban areas in 2011. The transition, which will see India's urban population reach a figure close to 558.8 million by 2031, is not simply a demographic shift. It places cities and towns at the center of India's developmental trajectory. In the coming decades, the urban sector will play a critical role in the structural transformation of the Indian economy and in sustaining the high economic growth rate that we aspire to. India's response to urbanization recognizes the international benchmarks as laid out in the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the New Urban Agenda. Given the growing importance of the urban sector, India has stimulated the growth of this sector by launching 6 missions: the Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, or AMRUT, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, the Housing for All, Smart Cities Mission, Swachh Bharat Mission, Heritage City Development and Augmentation Yojana, and the Deen Dayal Antodaya Yojana, National Urban Livelihoods Mission, along with schemes and programs to improve urban mobility. The missions are aimed at improving the quality of life in urban India. Integrated within the missions is a set of accompanying reforms which aim to improve urban services, make cities functioning more transparent, and functionaries more accountable. Has this actually happened is the question that we hope to answer today. And what are the real solutions that we can hope for? We often attribute the haphazard growth of cities to overcrowding, faulty infrastructure, and inadequate civic facilities. In our minds, the responsibility of the government. Whether this be true or not, the fact that city municipalities have the responsibility to manage and implement laid down for town planning is a fact that they have failed to do so, and this is a given. Lack of manpower, adequate training, etc. are all the reasons stated. However, these have also proved to be the loophole through which civic society has managed to gain benefits, which if laid down policies had been implemented by the municipalities, cities would have definitely grown differently. The role of civic society in aiding clear the mess Indian cities find themselves in today is well documented. It is ironic that most rural settlements in India are clean and garbage free. And the reason for that is because the people know but themselves to depend upon for managing waste, be it liquid or solid. In cities, this becomes the government's problem, and hence garbage piles up, sewers go blocked for several days, and water bodies get littered with spillage from slums and factories that are situated along their banks. People living in high rises are also not exempt from this feeling of not my problem. Dirty water and garbage gets thrown out of windows without discrimination. In this current situation, having abused the advantage of the inactivity of the governing body, we now need much stronger measures to clear the backlog of issues that plague our cities, be it broken infrastructure, mountains of solid waste, open defecation, or lack of clean water. The role of the private sector in development to find solutions to tackling urban planning problems such as wastewater management or solid waste management or faulty infrastructure has never been more relevant than it is today. This is no longer the government's problem alone. COVID has proved it's all our problem. Dirty cities are a real health hazard, and if we want to create a safer living environment for future generations, we need to act now. Thank you. Sunil, I hand it back to you.
Thank you, Natasha. Over to you, Sanjeev.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you both, Sunil and Natasha. I request Mithali to please quickly introduce the key speakers on the panel today. Thank you, Mithali.
Thank you, sir. Our first speaker is Mr. Dipinder Kapoor. He is a development and WASH expert. Currently, he's working as a senior fellow at Shiv Nada University. He is an ex-country representative of WaterAid India and ex-director NRM at CARE. He was also the director of program and advocacy at Oxfam. He led the sanitation capacity building platform at NIUA, developing its national strategy and 2 original frameworks for assessing capacity development effectiveness and resilient urban sanitation response effectiveness. Our next panelist is Ms. Kavita Wankhede, and she currently leads governance and services practices at IIHS. The key programs under this include the Tamil Nadu Urban Sanitation Support Program, which is supporting the government of Tamil Nadu to scale up FSM across the state, and citywide inclusive sanitation program at Trichy. Our next expert panelist is Mr. Royston Braganza. Mr. Braganza joined Grameen Capital in 2007 as CEO to launch the organization providing microfinance institutions and social enterprises wider access to the capital markets. He recently launched Grameen Impact India, a unique social debt vehicle to realize the dreams of a capital with a conscious ecosystem, which over time hopes to include a social venture fund and a social stock exchange. In addition to being the former chair of Sadhan, he serves on many boards and advisory bodies, including Grameen Foundation India, FICCI, CII, etc. A London-based finance monthly publication named Royston in the 2013 Global CEO Award winners list as among the top 4 CEOs in Asia and top 2 in India. Next, we have Ms. Meghna Malhotra, Deputy Director, Urban Management Center. Meghna has been working in the fields of urban governance and urban management across sectors, including urban water and sanitation. Over the past 2 decades, she has provided extensive technical support to programs in India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and Afghanistan. Meghna currently manages the Convergence program between the National Urban Livelihood Missions and Swachh Bharat Mission. She is supporting the implementation of the Sanitation Workers Safety Program in Odisha. Meghna has also been the lead author for the visual guide resource for female-friendly public and community toilets, which was an international guide for city managers. Next, we have Ms. Nidhi Batra, who is a development and impact professional, trained as an architect and environmental urban designer. Her work runs across the dimensions of sustainable development, WASH, urban governance, placemaking, urban and environmental awareness, skill development, and livelihoods. She is the founder of Sehriti Development Practices, a collaborative practice based on the ideology of co-creating cities. She is the consultant with the World Bank, National Skills Development Corporation, GRIHA, and other development organizations. She is a visiting faculty at architectural colleges across Delhi NCR. The discussion will be moderated by my colleague, Dr. Sanjeev Shekhar Jha, Director, India Sanitation Coalition. Dr. Jha has nearly 3 decades of experience in the sector that includes WASH, health and nutrition, among others. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Sanjeev to set the context for the discussion.
Thanks so much, Mitali, and good evening all. Panelists and participants. At the outset, I'm very honored to have initiated a discussion which I understand is relevant and also topical. Urban India achieved its open defecation free status in December 2019. However, still almost 80% of the water supply flows back into the ecosystem as wastewater. This can be a critical environmental and health hazard if not treated properly, but its proper management could also help the water managers in meeting the city's water demand. Untreated water has been recognized as one of the major sources of pollutants for rivers and other water bodies. And according to a report by the Central Pollution Control Board, towns having a population of 0.5 to 1 lakh generate approximately around over 2,900 million liters per day of sewage against an installed treatment capacity of only 200 million liters per day in 22 towns having a sewage treatment plant. So at present, only less than 5% of the sewage generated is being treated. This clearly means that there is a huge gap of over 95% between sewage generation and installed sewage treatment capacity in such towns. There are, of course, plans to increase the treatment capacity on a short midterm basis by just about 1.15%, which equals 35 million liters per day, which still leaves a huge gap of over 94% in sewage treatment capacity that needs to be addressed. The Government of India has been pushing the agenda of wastewater management with the launch of SBM 2.0. Complete fecal sludge management and wastewater management for cities with less than 1 lakh population is expected to be proposed under the mission. And the proposed budgetary allocation for wastewater management in SBM 2.0, Swachh Bharat Mission Urban 2.0, is likely to be over 79,000 crores of rupees. And this is almost a double as compared to the allocation during SBM phase 1. And the central share is also anticipated to be increased from over 15,000 crores of rupees, which is almost 2.5 times as compared to SBM phase 1. So for ULBs having a population of less than 1 lakh, funds are likely to be proposed in the ratio of 50-50, whereas the ratios will probably be 25-75 and 33-67 for ULBs with more than 10 lakh population and those with 1 lakh to 10 lakh population. Besides the program budget, the 15th Finance Commission has also duly recognized the role of urbanization in national economic development. And accordingly, there will be an all-time high allocation of over 1.21 lakh crores of rupees as against 87,000 crore plus rupees by the 14th Finance Commission for urban local bodies for a period starting 2021, ending 2026. And towns with under 1 lakh population will get 60% of tide funds for sanitation. So this quantum jump in allocation will go a long way, or at least expected to go a long way in minimizing the gaps in the urban infrastructure, provided it is used as seed capital and has synergy with other allocations for the urban sector by the Government of India, of course, the state governments and the other stakeholders, including the private sector. Accordingly, a well-planned follow-up agenda is expected to be adopted by states, enabling ULBs to utilize grants as intended and linking allocation with funds available from other sources, leading to the attainment of the two intended outcomes for the said class of cities which we are discussing today. All cities with a less than 1 lakh population met ODF++ and 50% cities with less than 1 lakh population made also water plus. For the benefit of the larger audience, the water plus, because ODA plus plus is fairly well understood, and but then for the benefit of the larger audience, the water plus protocol aims to provide a guideline for cities and towns to ensure that no untreated wastewater is released into the environment, thereby enabling sustainability of the sanitation value chain. And this is also in line with the government's focus on the water conservation and reuse under the famous Jal Shakti Abhiyan, and also aligns with the SDG target 6.1 and 6.2, which is about clean water and sanitation for all. While fecal sludge and septage management and wastewater management needs of cities with a population of more than 1 lakh are being addressed under the Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, as also mentioned by Natasha ma'am, smaller cities with a population of less than 1 lakh have perhaps not gotten the due. Accordingly, through this webinar, we have made an attempt to address the multiple aspects of wastewater treatment funding for cities with less than 1 lakh population. While funding will remain central to our discussion, we'd also request our panel to bring in correspondence with program management support aspects, both opportunities and challenges, in the absence of which funds might not yield the desired results. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have an esteemed panel to address all that I've said. And let me now request Dipendra sir, first we can ask to add in terms of his point of view of the topic, and also update us on, further on the approach that is likely to be adopted by the government towards addressing these urgent and pressing matters on hand. Over to Dipendra sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev, and welcome and good evening, good afternoon to everyone. I'm honored to be invited by none other than Mr. Kirti Shah and Natasha. And as a background, the previous two introductions have given you a background of the topic today. I would just like to add that whenever I read about urban planning, about sanitation and urban planning, I come across this paper, National Commission on Urbanization of 1988, of which Kirti Shah was one of the members. And that report is even very highly regarded even today, along with Mr. M. Butch at that time. So I'm very happy to be in this group, which I believe consists a lot of urban planners and architects. I'm not an urban planner. Whatever I'm going to share is based on my last 5 to 6 years of work in the urban sanitation sector, where we have tried to link urban planning with sanitation as part of our sanitation capacity building program work at NIUA. Now I'm out of NIUA, so I can freely present some of my take on some of the issues and challenges also in the sector. So let me just upload my presentation. And I would also like to say that India has progressed from a sectoral kind of urban planning, urban sanitation, to mission modes with the National Urban Sanitation Policy in 2008, then also the JNNURM. So these were the first mission-oriented big programs which were carried out. Before that, urban sanitation was usually low-cost sanitation schemes, but then they became missions and programs, and we are now at SBM2. So we've already had one phase of a 5-year mission on Swachh Bharat mission, which was one of the 5-6 missions which the government launched in 2015. And we are focusing right now on wastewater. So on wastewater, we will discuss. And what I'm presenting is based on the draft guidelines of Swachh Bharat mission, which were released in July. They are not yet formally announced. So these are draft guidelines. They may be revised, they may be changed, but whatever I'm going to share is based on these guidelines. And this is how my presentation will be. I will briefly map out, because this is the introductory presentation on the small and medium towns. What is the proposed approach in SBM2? Can there be a standardized approach or a program or a system for urban sanitation? what are some of the advantages if you do it like this, and why it may not work, and therefore what is it that we are looking at, some kind of recommendations. So the idea is that this is kind of a learning panel discussion session. I don't participate actually in webinars which are just for announcing or general. So it is better to talk as specifically as possible. So I'm going to share with you the factual parts of the draft SBM 2.0 guidelines. And before that, the urban context. So I don't need to repeat this. Everybody can read the extent of urbanization, and it's likely to be 50% by 2041. This is a good graph in terms of how urbanization has grown, and the last half part is rural and half part is urban. So on the right side, if you see, this is called the other rural. This has shrunk, and this part, the urban towns, with the classification from class 1 to class 6 towns, has increased. And substantially what has increased is, of course, class 1 towns and other class 1 towns, but also the next 2, 3, 4 level of towns. So these towns, which were very less by 1951, have now grown large in number. And this gives you how many towns we are talking and what is the extent. So we are essentially talking, in this case, for towns less than 1 lakh, as per the SPM, and also the topic of this discussion. So it includes all these class 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 towns. But even if you look at class 2, 3 towns, these also have a large number, and SBM is targeting about 3,900 towns. I'll come to that. So the mission outcomes for SBM, as were shared in the draft guidelines, were these 4: becoming ODF, all towns becoming also ODF plus, at least 1 lakh towns, less than 1 lakh towns become ODF plus plus. Then water plus also 50% towns, and the solid waste part is also addressed. I will not get into the water plus and the garbage part or the solid waste part because I want to stick to the wastewater part. So the definitions of ODF plus and ODF plus plus, because some of you may not be aware of, only for that reason I have put them on. So for the ODF plus, it says sustain what was there as ODF free, plus all community and public toilets are functional and well maintained. So if you do that, you are ODF plus. And for becoming ODF plus plus as a city, ward, etc., in addition to ODF plus, there should not be fecal sewage discharged. So wastewater fits into the mandate of SPM 2, which was not there earlier in SPM 1. Wastewater, again, the objective is defined as it includes untreated fecal waste or wastewater. So again, it's very clear it is both grey water and black water they're talking about. And the focus is on population less than, the cities with population less than 1 lakh. In terms of funding, the mission, the draft guidelines propose a total funding of about 1,41,000 crores, which was about 60,000 crores, as Sanjeev was saying earlier. It was now 2.5 times. But the government of India share last time was about 18,000 crores in SBM. Now it is 36,000 crores. But along with the funding are these eligibility criteria, which has been introduced in SBM guidelines, which says that in order to access that, the ULBs will have to initiate these reforms, which include taxation on property tax, user charges, and the finance program and financial management systems at the ULB levels. These were part of the reform requirements for all these years, and therefore now they have been aligned with the program for the first time. If you go through the draft guidelines, then this is the kind of funding pattern which they say would follow. So essentially, we should look at these other states, because majority of the ULBs will be in this category. The central share will be 25%, 16% would be the state share, and 59% would be from the Finance Commission, again, which Sanjeev was highlighting. Now let's come to this issue of septage and wastewater management. So again, the guidelines try to assess how much would be the quantum of wastewater generated and accordingly what solutions. So the solution obviously is very, clearly highlighted as an STP capacity here, if you see. So in the guidelines, there is assuming, say, for example, a town with 1 lakh population is supplied by with about 100 liters per capita per person per day, then this is the kind of out of which 80% is what is wastewater. So then finally you get a STP total MLD, million liters per day wastewater. So this is how these simple kind of calculations are done to arrive at this figure that there will be a 13,000 MLD requirement, which needs to be addressed in SPM. The SPM provides funding for these 3 components only. One is for tankers for desludging equipment. The second is for creation of what is called an interception and diversion channels, which I'll explain in the graph. And the third is the construction of sewage treatment plant with an fecal sludge treatment facility for wastewater. So these are only 3 components in wastewater which they are saying this will be provided. Now, this is the kind of visualization of the urban sanitation problem and solution, which SBM sees. So SBM sees a town like this, which is central core area in terms of geography is about 20 to 30%, but with the in terms of population, it's about 50%. So its visualization is that in a small town India of less than 1 lakh is typically a core central area, and then there is a periphery. In this scheme of affairs, what the SPM is proposing is these red lines, if you see, this line and this line. So these red lines are what is called an interception sewer. So they will lay down an interception sewer like this, which more or less horizontally or in a longitudinal manner covers the whole town. And these two will meet, and then the wastewater will be taken out into an STP. So this is their imagination and thinking that entire sewerage which is being generated in nalas, which is flowing left, right, up, down, will be captured by these sewers called interception sewers. So if there is a nala flowing here, it will enter the sewer. If the nala is flowing out here, it will enter the sewer. And then, the entire thing will be taken out. So in the absence of sewerage lines within the small town, this is how it's like a quick fix solution to address fecal sludge. And then it says all the peri-urban areas, outskirts, which may have on-site systems like septic tanks, then they can bring their septage through the desludging vehicles to the STP. So that way, each town will have an STP, and STP will have a co-treatment facility. So the guidelines are very clear that from now on, we will not promote a town which only has a fecal sludge treatment plant. We will promote a town which has an STP, and the STP should have a co-treatment facility. And the funding for which from the center will be only for these interception and diversion channels, for STPs, and for desludging tankers and equipment. So this is the same thing I won't repeat again. So they have this central core zone. This is called the central core zone. And then it is mandatory component to have an STP, and 50% of the town is covered, and all sewer network, if the city wants or a town wants, it will have to be borne entirely by them. Whether they do it from their own resources or from private funding or from 15th Finance Commission, that's up to the town. So now, what are some of the advantages or merits of this? So one of the advantages that it's a measurable 5-year time frame. So in a 5-year time frame, you can actually commit to setting up 4,000 STPs in 4,000 towns of India, small and medium towns. And that will make you achieve ODF plus. Septage management through co-treatment. Since you're providing for an FSTP, STP, then you are also doing septage management within that. These are also future-ready solutions, and the STP, because it's on a Nala is already carrying water, so it's operational from day one. And when future all the sewerage systems are there, the volumes will increase. And finally, it's also a low-cost solution. So if you were to actually invest in a sewerage system, the cost would be very high. Here, for about 5 crores, you can do what you would otherwise have to spend about 100 crores per town for a sewerage system. But this approach also has its shortfall because it's a one approach fits all, one size fits all option. What are some of the issues? 2/3 of India is arid and semi-arid. And this comes from my background and my work with Rajesh, with SPWD and in the rural side. But agroclimatically, 2/3 of India is semi-arid and arid. And you may not have nalas with wastewater in very small towns for 6 months, 8 months in a year. And an STP which doesn't get a regular amount of inflow becomes dysfunctional and can, destroy itself. Topography and nala flow. I have visited towns both in South India as well as Uttar Pradesh, where in some places the slopes are so flat, there is no outflow actually. Sometimes the wastewater is just stagnating somewhere on the side, wherever next to the rail lines or next to some open areas, or it is actually entering the irrigation canal. That is also happening. But to imagine that all the towns will have a central core which is slightly higher and has kind of nalas flowing around it, and then you can tap. And how many nalas can you tap also? So there are these issues. And third issue is this low BOD level, biological oxygen demand. So the nalas are predominantly wastewater, grey water, bathing water, spring water, all kind of other water in which we are now, in which also the supernatant of septage tanks flows in. But the BOD level, which we have ourselves seen in some of the work which we did in Odisha, in Madhya Pradesh, is very low. Now, if the BOD level is very low, the biological treatment of STP plants will not happen. So therefore, that is also a constraint. And about interceptor sewers, the guidelines also talk of pumps and lifting pumps, and which will actually make it very expensive in the long run if you have to lift, because two nalas may not be on the same level. So it's going to be quite an engineering task. So what is the way forward? So in terms of way forward, we see water and sanitation are state subjects. And under the 74th Amendment, ULBs are devolved with the ownership decision making. So what is required actually is an urban strategy at state level, prepared by aggregating the urban local bodies in the state and planning an approach at the state level, but which is very much owned and implemented at the town level. So you need that, and you need a vision for about 20 to 30 years to come up with that. So each state, for example, as Kavita will share about Tamil Nadu, or Meghna will share about Gujarat, will have very different strategies. So some may say we will only do this, somebody will say we will do a lot of things. So therefore, you need to allow that strategy to come up. And if your aim is centralized sewerage system, and we are not against any system. See, at least in my work, we were not promoting any system. We saw the benefits of decentralized and non-sewer systems, but centralized sewerage systems can also be very cost effective and very pro-poor in very dense populations. They may be the best solutions. So if you want to promote centralized sewerage systems, centralized essentially means networked. So it doesn't mean one centralized one for a lot, but you can have a decentralized centralized systems also. So if your centralized sewerage systems is what you want to go for, then go for it in a long-term perspective, rather than trying to push everybody into installing one system in the beginning. And then, have a complementary set. So these are my last two slides, which talk of, in our work, what were we looking at as options for Indian cities. Firstly, not all small towns need a centralized or a non-network solution. They may not be generating enough wastewater, or they may have solutions like these deep row entrenchments, where you just dig a rows and you empty the sludge there without treatment. So that is also possible. Then interceptor Nala based STPs certainly are a possibility. I don't deny that there are advantages, and I have myself seen towns in Punjab where these small towns have already installed their sewerage system. Unfortunately, their entire sewers empty into the Nala or the river next to the village or the small town. So if there are sewers installed and there at the outfall you put up a treatment plant, it can work. But how many towns in India actually have that? That's a big issue. And I don't think in our most populous towns of UP, Bihar, this is there. Then just having septic tank construction and improvement will work in a lot of states, especially the Northeast. So the feedback we got from, say, Manipur and others was their houses are bigger, even urban areas. There is space for these systems. So then, that's another one. Then you, of course, have individual level fecal sludge treatment plants, which we were promoting as part of the National Fecal Sludge and Septage Alliance. Now, these are also possible, and these are not just possible in small towns, but even larger towns. Even Delhi, where we have colonies, where we have DDA parks in each colony, there is a possibility to link up your, FSTPs through a network or a non-network system next to your place. So whether you call it decentralized or you call it non-network, but there is a possibility for which you'll have to have a complete paradigm shift in how you plan sanitation systems for large towns. But for small towns, you can certainly do this. And of course, there is this two options. One is a cluster of towns with one FSTP. So the problem with the SPM scheme is that it talks of one town, one STP. It doesn't look at this option, that there could be a cluster of towns which can have one STP, or they can be a cluster of towns with an STP plus an FSTP. This we saw in our work in Uttarakhand. You have 2-3 towns which are a cluster of towns with one big town which can support an STP, but 2-3 towns a little far away where making an FSTP also makes sense. So, it's not again a one size fits all, as I was saying. And then you can have a cluster of towns on the Nala. So why one Nala? Why not 2-3 Nalas you cluster at one point and then build an STP there? So not one Nala, one town, but maybe one Nala for 3 towns. Then, of course, the very old technology is the solid free sewer technology. This is there. I don't need to get into that, but that is also an option. And finally, what we see in Bangalore and demonstrated very well, Nala and lakes-based bio treatment. So again, there the treatment is at the lake level, not at the Nala in outfall at the town, but at the Nala when it reaches the lake. So I would end here. These were some of the ideas which I wanted to share at the national level or at the level of the national policy, which we were discussing. And I'll be very happy to hear about the other panelists speaking about other experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dipender. And I think, is it a good idea to take at least maybe a couple of questions now? Because I think it's absolutely fresh in the memory of the audience. So, or otherwise, the other idea is to, the other alternative is to proceed with the other panelists, and then maybe during the Q&A session itself, we'll, revert to questions. Thank you. So we will proceed with the idea number 2, that we'll reach out to. So now I'm reaching out to my next panelist, Kavita Wankhede. And my question to her is that the infrastructure creation versus operation and maintenance of that already created is the premise. Which do you think is a foremost priority when weighed against the SDG target 6.2 and why? And you may please bring in, Kavita, from your Tamil Nadu experience, points such as link to the value chain with major focus on treatment of septage and sewage, operation and maintenance being important, households bringing in investment, and private sector being a player in that space, etc. So in a nutshell, if I may ask, what are the things to keep in mind while looking at sanitation for small towns, or what affects financing for small towns with special reference to wastewater management? Over to Kavita. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjeev, for that. Just give me a second to share my screen.
Absolutely.
So I'll try to do my best to answer the questions as far as possible. And thanks, Dipinder, for setting the context so well. It's made my life easier. Yeah, I'm just going to do this screen. Okay, Sanjeev, can you see my screen?
Absolutely, yeah. Very clearly.
All right. Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Kavita. Thanks for being here, and thanks to INHAF and ISC for giving me this opportunity. So I'm going to try and answer Sanjeev's question, but also the first part of the presentation is actually around O&M versus infrastructure creation and some other larger issues. And like Sanjeev said, the second part of the presentation is more about our own work with Government of Tamil Nadu. So this is a version of the same slide I'm aware that Dipinder used, and I just want to again reinforce a couple of points. One is that this is 2011. It's 10 years since this, and we can expect that our urban population would have increased. I also wanted to use this to highlight that while it's true, a massive percentage of our population, urban population, is concentrated in class 1 cities or big cities, there is a substantial population in small and medium towns. And the other thing I want to highlight here is if you look at the 182 million, again, census 2011 figures of large villages, you would see that many of these villages are actually cities. The reason why they are not classified as town is because of administration reason, or maybe they don't meet the requirement of workforce. So in a sense, when we talk about below 1 lakh cities, we are looking at solutions not only for the current small towns, but also for a large number of villages which are actually going to come into that category very soon. And in forward looking, we need to look at what are the problems of small towns. I saw a lot of faces I kind of didn't recognize. I'm assuming there are some non-sanitation folks in the audience. So sanitation professionals, please bear with me, but I'll take 1 minute to explain. Basically, I think Dipinder also talked about it, but I wanted to make a couple of points. One is that when we talk about wastewater treatment is one part of the chain. There is a full chain, whether you're looking at network system or sewerage systems, or whether you're looking at septic management or fecal sludge management. There is a full chain which involves toilets, which involves septic tanks in case of on-site systems, which involves desludging trucks, and or conveyance for UGD, underground drainage, and then an FSTP and STP. The point I want to make is 2 points I want to make. One is that if sanitation is a chain, it's as good as the weakest part of the chain, right? So even if we have wastewater treatment system, if we don't have conveyance things in place, or like we said that we didn't have toilets, now we have the toilets, and now hence the progression to ODF plus, whenever we're talking about anything, whether it's financing or any other option, we need to look at the full chain. And secondly, I also think that operation and maintenance is as important, if not more important, than construction and implementation. And the reason for that is, I think there were a whole range of urban schemes that have come up, which Natasha mentioned right in the beginning, which have actually tried to solve at least some of this deficit in the capital side. Yes, those schemes looked at mostly the big top 500 cities, but with other schemes coming in, hopefully that will move to smaller towns. But operation and maintenance is something nobody talks about, of we talk about it, we don't know the solutions, and I'll be speaking to that. So these are the 2 points on this. And I also want to make a point, because the webinar was really about looking at investments. And I just want to make a point that we often don't understand or realize, and we talk about very big capital investments, which goes into STP, sewage treatment plants, but actually the whole chain already has a range of players in it. So the construction of toilets is either households or under schemes like Swachh Bharat supported by government. Additionally, if you're looking at something like fecal sludge management train, you have desludging trucks, which are largely informal private sector. And then of course you have the government. So I think we just need to be cognizant that there is already investments in sanitation. And the reason why I also bring this up is that if you're looking at small and medium towns particularly, or dense villages, there is already investment that has gone into construction of toilets, and in many cases already investments which are at a household level, or if it's big apartments, then at that level of containment system, which is either septic tanks or pit latrines or some form of decentralized sanitation system. And we need to build from there as far as possible. This is again to give a same sense that when we are talking about financing, we often, at least I used to associate it with big infrastructure and big financing, but because of the way sanitation is in the country, you will see a whole range of players which are there and whom we have to work on. Going forward, I will focus on treatment and what can be done around it, because that's kind of the topic we're talking about, but I just wanted to throw it out there. So on the treatment side, I want to highlight a point which Dipinder made, but reinforce this, is that while sanitation is a state subject and they're national schemes, what happens is that the capex is often borne by GOI or state governments earlier and even now, and OPEX mostly lies with urban local bodies. And this is whether it is because it is fecal sludge management or whether it's a network system. I think the exception has been something like Namami Gange, where actually the state and central government have underwritten the cost of operations and maintenance. But that remains an exception, and there may be some other outliers, right? So it is also very important to consider OPEX. The point that I made in the beginning, O&M costs, is because urban local bodies, we know, despite the 74th Amendment, have limited finances, have limited budget, and I will talk about it later. And it's very important to consider that. Second point I think we need to make is we talk about financing that is possible financing from the private sector. And here I just want to make a point is that there are a range of players. I'm sorry, I don't have exact data because much of the data are not available, but there is a range from very big players in this sector to relatively smaller ones, which I'm going to be talking about. And the smaller ones may be involved in other ways, whether it's construction or O&M, may not necessarily have the bandwidth to put in the money. And also that landscape is really different in those small towns. Again, something I'll speak about. And the other thing is we often talk about government schemes and government investment not forthcoming. Again, there has been investments. There has been Yin and Yaram, there's been Amrut, there's been SBM, there's been a stream of government funding. And the thing is, you may or may not have a private sector responding to this. This may be because they're not interested or because the ticket size is not too big. And these are some things to consider while going forward. Speaking from our experience in Tamil Nadu, so just a kind of 10 seconds introduction. We were a technical support unit with government of Tamil Nadu. We were focusing on fecal sludge management, so rest of my presentation will focus on that option. This is not to say that other options don't work. It's just that what we have done, and more than what we have done, what government of Tamil Nadu has chosen. And interestingly, what we were doing is that we were demonstrating in a large town, relatively large town, Trichy, but also in 2 small town panchayats. And as you can see, there are 528 of these town panchayats. So which really means that the solution that we were trying to build out was something that worked not only for metros, but also for small towns. So again, there are 3 things here. So there was a state investment plan, which was prepared by government of Tamil Nadu, and this is looking at existing infrastructure and how we can use. And I want to highlight 3 points here. One is that one of the things that they did was looking at utilization of existing facilities. And then second is cluster model. I'll come to that later slide. But if you look at first two columns, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, basically with an investments of around 200 odd crores, the government was could finish around 75% of its urban population. And that's because it decided to engage in these 3 strategies that I'm going to talk about. So again, assuming not everybody is from the sanitation background, co-treatment essentially, and Dipender spoke about it, is basically allowing fecal sludge from septic tanks or on-site systems to be treated at existing or to be designed sewage treatment plants, which means that we can utilize the existing infrastructure. I think many of us know that existing sewage treatment plants in many parts of the country are underutilized. So this is a good way to utilize the infrastructure. And this is kind of an initial assessment we did, but as you can see that even from investments as small as 3 lakhs to between 20 lakhs, you can really retrofit existing STPs to take fecal sludge and add a whole bunch of more households to an existing infrastructure. And I think this is where this option is available. It's really great to kind of utilize and make best use of facilities. Second is where it's not available. The thing that Tamil Nadu did was build FSTPs for a cluster. I'll come to the cluster model. And this is just to give you a sense of cost, which is around 2 to 2.5 for a 20 KLD plant, etc. But the point I want to say here is that the state adopted a modular approach. And the reason for that is there is a tendency in India and elsewhere to really build large fecal sludge treatment plants, which are oversized. And by reserving a land for a larger FSTP, but building only one bit at a time, it really gives one an opportunity to later on add to that as and when the desludging becomes more regular and more regular. So that is another thing that one can consider, because I think the point is that you need to begin to provide sanitation now, and we can't really wait till all the money is available. Second point I want to make is that FSM is an evolving sector, and there weren't too many technologies available, let's say 4 or 5 years back. And at that time, the thinking was that if we were to do a contract like, and I might say we, the sector, we were to do something like a design build and make the tenders technology agnostic, it would ensure a lot of innovations that would happen. Versus an approach of the government saying that let's prepare a DPR and let's just get contractors to build them. Now, both approaches have their pros and cons. But the fact is, it is true that they not in Tamil Nadu, but in other places, we've had an issue where tenders have to be cancelled because there weren't enough private players in the sector. And I think this is the point, is that it's not because the capacity is not there, but clearly in an emerging sector, somewhere what the government is demanding and the private sector is wanting needs to meet for the sector to evolve. And this is to say that because that kind of model were involved, the kind of contractors we got were like people who had a turnover of 10 to 25 crores, which is not too small, but which is kind of comparatively small compared to the other larger STP players or water construction companies that you have. The O&M range is around 11 to 17 lakhs per annum. And even this may be difficult for some ULBs to meet because of COVID, and COVID has really shattered the finances. So what we have also done is a cluster model. So as you can see in the diagram, there is a host ULB, and then there is who's bearing the operating costs and has the land, and then they are providing services to a set of ULBs in a cluster, and they are paying the host ULB for O&M. Now, what is the advantage of this is that basically in smaller towns, and one can do this with rural areas also, it's cost sharing, one could ring fence the account, and it's reducing burdens. It also optimizes cost. Of course, these figures are very, very, I mean, we're still working out, but between something like rupees 28 to 182 per year, you are able to provide the services to the households. So just to conclude, so what's the learning? One is, like I said, that where there is STPs, co-treatment should be considered. or FSTP is another possibility. Whatever technological option is chosen, whether it's FSM, whether it's IND, whether it's sewage, I do think O&M costs need to be considered upfront. This one is if for any of these funds, I think apart from the funding that comes from the national and state governments, 15th Finance Commission has said that 30% of the funds, tight funds, need to go to SWM and sanitation. So that's something that's available for ULBs. Trying cluster models. And here I just also want to throw out that even rural SBM now allows for decentralized treatment plants or FSTP. So this will not work in all the states, will not work across all locations. But if you had a cluster of rural and urban, and like I said, that the line between rural, large villages and small towns is really bleak, you could actually potentially have a treatment facility located in rural that's also serving the urban. One could build modularly, but I think the point is we need to start now. And I think COVID has kind of had us reevaluate a lot of possibility, but the fact remains that sanitation is a public health good. And we really need to begin to start now and provide what we can. And private sector, like I said, it's differentiated. And secondly, there was a study done by IntelGap, and they were looking at what would incentivize private players in sanitation and FSM particularly. And it emerged that we need to show a market size to private sector, obviously, so that they can see that if they invest in a certain set of technologies and processes, they'll get the return. And also the issue of timely payment was another issue that emerged. So these are the few thoughts, more generic in nature, in how we could look at sanitation for small and medium towns.
Oh, great, Kavita. Audience, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Great, Kavita. I think it was a wonderful presentation, and I think you have raised also certain questions, but more than the questions, you have offered solution. Like the example that you have said, where the ULBs can enter into a partnership, a memorandum of understanding to be able to make use of this same treatment facility. I mean, exciting, but and I'm sure the audience would have a few questions around that, and everything else that you have talked about. But then, in the interest of time now, I'm not sitting into that Q&A mode, and I will leave it towards the end. So my next panelist is Royston Braganza, and to him, the quantum jump, Royston, in allocation that I have also talked about, and Deepinder sir has talked about at even a greater length, is certainly expected to go a long way in minimizing the gaps in the urban infrastructure provided. It is used as seed capital and has synergy with other allocations for the urban sector and for urban wash in particular. And allow me to pick the private sector contribution as also commercial finance, which refers to various types of finance that are neither concessional nor official development finance or public finance, and which are usually provided at market rates. In our sector, this can range from microfinance loans to bonds and can be offered to service providers, local government, which is ULBs in this case, individual users or user groups. And of course, the providers of commercial finance, we know, include domestic commercial banks, microfinance institutions, and or capital market investors via bonds or equity. What do you think we have achieved or can potentially achieve as far as these reforms around financing for our own sector are concerned? The sector is water supply and sanitation. Over to Ross. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev, and congratulations to all the other speakers so far. I think there are probably 84 people on this conference that have more insight about this subject than I have. And it was great learning. It's extremely, extremely insightful, both in terms of the dimensioning of the challenge, but also, just the enormity of the goal ahead. For me, as you mentioned, banks and domestic private investors, and you mentioned MFIs, I often joke that that's the world that I've, while other people like you, Sanjeev, have risen up the ladder, I seem to have come down. So corporate bank, investment bank, mid-market, SMEs, microfinance, rock bottom with Grameen. So that's the journey in some ways, which is the race to the bottom that I like to call it. But really, when we set up Grameen Capital to be able to bring capital into microfinance, this was 2007. 2006, Professor Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize. 2007, we started Grameen Capital in India, and the gap was significant. There was about $1 billion of supply and $50 billion of demand. So huge gap. And therefore, when Dipinder, when Kavita, when you talk about the gap that there exists, both in terms of, less than 5% is treated or, addressed, it does not shock me in a sense that we have done it. And that gives us great confidence. So how do we look at that with the same lens? What did we do in microfinance that probably could be used in this space is what is sort of tickling my mind when I hear you and Natasha speak and Dipinder as well. So what did we do in microfinance to build it from $1 billion supply to today where it is at about 30 billion? And as chair of Sadhan, when I finished my term, we had 52 million clients. So that is the type of scale that we've been able to build. One of the critical things that contributed to that is making it part of the priority sector lending target. So how did we define that as priority sector? How did we bring that into the definition of mainstream finance? Because the banks have to lend 40% of their exposure into the priority sector, 32% if you're a foreign bank. All of this is significant amount of investment that needs to come into what RBI defines as weaker sections, priority sector, women's empowerment. Sanitation is critical again there. But in education today, even though it's there, or in it's talking about loans to students. What about loans to schools that are providing affordable education? Same here. What about institutions or enterprises that are providing sanitation solutions, that are building treatment plants, that are, those should also qualify for priority sector lending. So engaging with regulators is absolutely critical to be able to build the type of scale that the sector needs. The other piece that is equally important is saying, how do we bring in new pools of capital? How do we attract private wealth? How do we attract, HNIs? We are traditionally focused only on grant funding, but grant funding can move the needle only so much. Again, CSR is a good opportunity, but post-COVID, a lot of CSR has gone into PM Cares, gone into other schemes. The CSR pot itself has shrunk because profits have shrunk. So all of these challenges may not have hit us in the last 12 months, but will hit us in the next 12, because there's always a lagged effect for some of these. So how do we find new pools of capital in this space? And then another idea that therefore comes to mind is catalytic capital. When Rockefeller wanted to do work in microfinance, and they said, here is $5 million. And we said, no, we don't want grants. We won't take the money. And they said, no, but we want you to take it. We want you to do something with it. And we said, no, we won't take the money. Till they forced us and we forced them, and we were forced, therefore, to come up with something creative. And we said, you keep the 5 million, you give that as an SBLC or a standby letter of credit or a guarantee to a bank. The bank on the back of that will lend $5 million. That will lend to MFI A, B, C, D, E. MFI A, B, C, D, E will repay. That guarantee remains untouched. We then give it to MFI, J, K, L, M, N. Then they will repay, it will remain untouched. Then you give it to X, Y, Z, and others. So that model of creating a guarantee pool and then catalyzing multiple providers. So that could be, Banka Biolu, which is setting up something, or, in Pune, where you're setting up something, or Ahmedabad, where, or municipalities. So the whole ULM model can actually benefit from a guarantee capacity that is getting created. Now, so that is model number 2. So the first is, and I just talk about 3, and then Sanjeev, happy to answer questions, because I think there is a lot more, that is possible based on creatively structuring. So one is creating, as I said earlier, the language, the regulation in that policy, the taxonomy. And for that, people like, Natasha and Kirti have to really push at a regulatory level. Because today RBI talks a different language for priority sector, Ministry of Companies Act talks a different language for CSR, SEBI talks a different language for social venture capital fund, all define social, but define it differently. I would say scrap it all and put 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, put the definitions of the SDGs within that, so that everyone then, when you ask 6.2, Sanjeev, then, why should we be talking about different nomenclature and taxonomy based on who the regulator is? When 193 countries have signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals, let's just use something that is universally accepted. So I don't need to break my head, with water.org or with someone else to be able to find the right way to take it forward. So my point then is, one, create priority sector lending, create the right disposition in terms of policy. Two, look at catalytic models of guarantees, where someone can provide the guarantee and then you can really scale up and scale up the funding. The third is an interesting one, which we launched 2 years ago in 2018, when I was invited to the UN General Assembly to address this aspect of sustainable development goals and its financing. That number was $30 trillion as a shortfall. Now, 30 trillion is not going to come from donor money, is not going to come from philanthropy. It's not going to come as much of the goodness of the heart of Natasha and Kirti will not come. Because you can push and push uphill, but you can't reach that number. It needs to come from mainstream capital. How does mainstream capital get excited about something that they don't understand? And there we created something called the SDG Impact Bond, where we say, let's put enterprises who are creating these, let's raise money on the back of a guarantee, let's define what those milestones are, and then bring in pay for success partners who will pay based on those models. So I'll give you 4 examples and then I'll shut up. The first we did was in goal 5, where we worked with women's empowerment, where we said, let us train 2,000 tribal women in rural Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh to become poultry farmers. So we got a guarantee from a US-based organization. We found an Indian implementing partner working in Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. They identified the tribal women, they gave them the training, they got them the chickens, they built the coops. In fact, Amitabh Kant was excited because we used Kadaknath chicken, which is a very hardy variety. So the ability to learn on the ground what's most prudent for them. And then if those 20,000 or women were trained and skilled, there was an entity which was interested in women's empowerment, who said, if you can do that, we will pay for the success and the outcomes. And they repaid it and we closed that loop. Then we got bold. We did another one with 5 social enterprises on skilling. And that was goal 8 on livelihoods, where we found EduBridge, iPrimed, iStar, LaborNet, and Empower Pragati. 5 implementing partners. And so you could supplement that in your mind with 5 social enterprises in sanitation or in fecal sludge management or in sewage treatment. And they came together. We gave them, there was a guarantee that came from Acumen Fund. We gave them financing and defined the milestones. You will train them, you will place them, you will do X certifications, you will have X number of mentoring hours, all of that, same way as you are doing. So much of ODF reduction or so much of fecal treatment or water saving or whatever else. So you define that, you guys are the experts. And then say, who is interested in those outcomes? Is Coca-Cola interested in water saving? Is Unilever interested in ODF? Is Reckitt Benckiser interested? Or whatever. So you define who, and I'm so far giving you only private sector examples, but those could well be the SBM. It could well be the government. It could well be Swachh Bharat. So those can be the outcome payer. Those can be the guarantee provider. The government has the capacity to do both. You decide, depending on how efficient you think they are and how much time they will take, which one to be. If you take the thing, they'll take 12 years to move, or 12 months to move. So that was a misnomer, but probably, hopefully never. If it take 12 months to move, make them the outcome funder. If you think they can move in 12 days, make them the guarantee provider so that you can then excite more capital to come in. So 3 models: debt using bank and definition of priority sector and changing probably the commonality of definition. So SEBI, Social Venture Capital Fund, can lend into sanitation because they have the same goals as 6.2. Second, identifying guarantee providers who can provide that model, based on what is the, projects that they are financing or supporting. And the third, which we think is most interesting, because we were able to do, as I said, goal 8, and then we did another one on goal 7, which was decarbonization bond. Then we did another one on goal 2, which is food security. And we're doing one, we've done 2 COVID impact bonds for training women artisans to make masks and other COVID products. So the fact is that now it's tested. We are excited, and hopefully with ISC we may have some good news. When we have a next convening. Not good news to announce that we are going to do something, but that we've done something and that we have really moved ahead. And hopefully this conversation will sort of start something new as well that we can scale up in this space. So I'll pause there, Sanjeev, but happy to take on any follow-on questions that you have at this moment.
Great. I mean, we love the three model solution that we have talked about. So, if Mitali has already picked up certain question, is fine. Otherwise, I have one question that I have already marked that I would like to ask Rostam. Mitali, have you got any other question? If not, then I'll go ahead. I mean, one of the audiences have asked the complexity of blended finance, appropriate model for OPEX and or CAPEX, and cess to the citizen is in itself, needing some more simplification for ULBs to get on to ride on. So how would you react to it first?
So I think blended finance itself is a challenging term, and I've never understood that term because it's very difficult to approach. It almost makes one feel that the commercial investor has to reduce their expectation, and the one who expects 0 has to increase their expectation. So it comes to some blended number in the middle. And I say that's the recipe for disaster, because each one has to do best what they can do. So let the social investor maximize social impact, let the commercial investor optimize his commercial return. But how do you bring them together in a single instrument? How do you blend them in an instrument, giving them different roles, not meshing their expectations? So therefore, capital expense, CapEx versus OpEx, don't get into that. What is the project at hand? How much does it need? If it needs $1 million or 7 crores, then is there a guarantee provider from, say, the grant world who is interested in supporting this? So they bring in that guarantee, and they are told that by bringing this guarantee, you meet whatever objectives you had at the end of the day. So for example, Gates Foundation, I'm not giving you an example in the sanitation space, but hypothetical example in say a women's empowerment space. Gates Foundation had, say, $1 million to work with 5 social enterprises in Orissa for women's empowerment and skilling. So they would give 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 200,000 each. We're saying, Mr. Gates, don't give that. You keep it with you in your bank. You give a guarantee. We as Grameen Impact will lend to those 5, 200,000 each. We are de-risked because we have your guarantee. We lend and we define the outcomes exactly the way you want it. Women will be trained, women will be skilled, they will start businesses, they will hire 5 people, whatever is the definition that you would have defined as women's empowerment and women entrepreneurship. At the end of the year, if we are able to meet all of those objectives, we may then go to Johnson & Johnson and say, would you be interested in women's empowerment, or Procter & Gamble or Unilever? And they'll say yes. Say, pay us now, after the work is done, once or commit to paying once the work is done from your CSR, because now you are putting money only when it's met its target. So every rupee is effective. You're not putting money upfront for a project and wondering whether it will meet its objective or not and hoping it will. Here you're paying for success. If they pay us, if they pay the social enterprise who repays us, we do not use Gates's 1 million. We then use that in Jharkhand, then we use it in Chhattisgarh. So the ability for us to blend different motivations of capital by offering them a different role, as opposed to blending different return expectations to getting them on a unique return. That's the difference in the mindset that I think will solve this CAPEX and OPEX issue. So it should not be taken as trying to blend, because there are different risk return expectations in CAPEX and in OPEX, much longer time frames, all of that. So rather than blending a return, blend roles and make smaller bonds, one for CAPEX, one for OPEX, so that also doesn't blend and complicate things.
So
Thanks
there's
so
one.
much. Yeah, yeah, Mitali.
So there's one question that says, but how do we make the ULB understand all of this? Who are the real decision makers?
Just send them to Natasha. I mean, I'll send them to Grameen Impact, because once you've seen it at work, I mean, globally, if you look at London has done a few impact bonds, and UK, and then there is some in the US. There have been SIBs and DIBs, and we are saying, no, we don't understand SIBs and DIBs because these things are announced and they take 3 years to happen and they have to be $100 million. And we are saying that is not what we want in India. We want Sasta Sundaro Tikau.
Exactly.
We want it to be done in 3 months. We want it to be operational. We want it to be small size. So can we do 100 bonds of $1 million rather than do one bond of 100 million?
Yeah.
There have to be 100 ULBs across the country who are excited to do a small bite. They have to taste it. They have to see the benefit. So if you commit them, try to convince them for 100 million, they will go nowhere. Take a small amount, go, create a small module and then replicate across the country. I think that's the model that will work with the ULBs and get them excited, because the downside is limited. They're not putting money out that is big. Try, test 1 or 2 centers, 1 or 2, projects, and then move forward.
Thanks very much. I mean, it was very interesting, and all of us, and thanks, Western, for giving that energy, flow of the entire discussion. So,
the energy is more selfish.
Yeah.
I have a flight to catch, so I'm running.
I know.
but it's always a pleasure. And Sunil and Kirti, thank you. It's good meeting you guys. There's a lot of possibility. The gap is enormous from what I see, from what you presented, Sunil. It needs mainstream capital. It needs creative structuring. It needs blending in the sense of different parties coming together. There is nothing that succeeds like success. We can have multiple conferences every year and every 6 months. But if we don't do 1 or 2 bonds, show that it works, demonstrate it, and then do a roadshow, do it to SBM, take it to ULBs, probably that's a better way to do it. So pick 1 or 2, let's get them done. From Grameen Impact, we are committed. I've told Natasha, if you find a guarantee provider, we are ready from day 1. Let's go ahead and do it.
I'm going to do it before the end of this year. Don't worry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Western. Thanks. Yeah, so over to my next panelist, Meghna. Meghna, with regard to treatment, what challenges have cities faced with respect to individual, institutional, and financial capacities, and what can we learn from this experience to be able to inform and support the national level implementation of SBM 2.0 urban? And also please reflect on the prospects to mitigate some of these challenges. Over to Meghna. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjeev ji. Am I audible? Yeah, great. And I think thanks INHAF and ISC for giving me the opportunity to come here and at least share about and especially reflecting back on the Gujarat experience. So I'll be talking, as you earlier alluded to in your introduction, Sanjeev ji, that we also need to look at other determinants of whether this entire system will really work or not. And that's something that I'm going to build on basing. Yes,
I think we can't see her. If she can just put on her video.
My video is on. Can you see me?
No, not really.
No, we can
We can
see her.
Okay.
No, she's not visible. Yeah, now she's visible. Yes.
Am I visible?
Yes, you are.
Great. So I think I'll be building upon the Gujarat experience, and I think what Kavita presented was a very a statewide initiative that has been taken for FSTPs and the whole, the focus on FSSM. I'll be talking about the course that Gujarat has charted since 2009 on very clearly looking at centralized systems, setting of sewer lines, the whole sewered systems, and also setting up STPs across all cities. So Gujarat very early on, since 2009, I think took this initiative saying that we need to just have sewered systems in all of our cities, in all of our 170 odd cities, and we are also going to set up STPs in all of our cities. So just give me a moment while I bring up my presentation. Is this visible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think this was 2009, and this was completely funded by the state. The state was, driving this entire mission under the Mukhyamantri Swarnim, Jayanti Yojana, and very state-driven. Cities where didn't have much, engagement into the entire thinking and the design process. State nodal agencies, the Gujarat Urban Development Company, GUDM, GWSS, these were the nodal agencies which were really driving this entire work across all cities. But since it's been 12 years and till now we see about 30 STPs that have been built over the past 12 years. And if I were to focus our entire conversation around the small cities, so we have about 137 really the smaller cities, the cities less than 1 lakh population, about generating about 15% of all the sewage or the wastewater that's being generated in cities, and housing about 22% of urban Gujarat. And it's here, if we really look at across these 137 cities, only 14 STPs are in some halat of, they're operational. When we visited all of these 14 cities last year, only 7 were operational and were commissioned and were functioning. So I'll be talking a little bit more based on what worked, what challenges have cities faced when it comes to, having these kind of systems in place. So if our entire focus and of Swachh Bharat Mission 2 is to ensure that all wastewater or all fecal matter generated in our cities gets effectively treated as per standards, right? That's what our ultimate outcome is. How can we really ensure that cities, whatever granular level issues that they have or the solutions that they have, can be included as part of the whole design and implementation framework? And that's what I'm really alluding to in this entire presentation. So the whole process in Gujarat was again divided into 2 phases. The first phase was laying the sewer lines. So over the last almost a decade, a lot of cities have been, they've just been dug up, and you see this massive underground sewer network being laid. Again, without really considering whether they have very strong on-site sanitation systems, whether what kind of systems will work, can we strengthen the existing on-site systems, etc. And it's because of this that almost 50% of the cities that we have out of these 137 cities, they have less than 50% coverage, connections to sewerage. And I think this is very classical. We see cities that are being forced on a sewer kind of a system process, and which had a very strong on-site system. The whole hesitance and the whole to transition from a very from their own septic tanks, soak pit kind of systems to a sewered system. Also, what we are seeing is that the whole connection to water. Here in Gujarat, we see that almost out of the 7 cities where the STPs are functioning right now, you see the kind of LPCDs that are there right now in cities. You need at least 100 liters per capita per day to, at least for the sewer systems to work and function properly. But this is very low. In Dwarka, it's as low as 60 LPCD. And this again points to the question that how is the whole system going to work? If we look at, again, the whole shifting from the on-site to sewer connections, and if you look at across the cities, the lighter yellow is the proportion of the city that is dependent on your on-site systems, while the darker ones, which is already transitioned to a sewer line system. So this whole transitioning is extremely challenging, extremely difficult. There is a lot of IEC which is required, a lot of communication efforts which are required to nudge citizens to move to a safer system, or to, in this case, not necessarily a safer system, but at least transition to a sewer line, to a sewered system. So the same thing in the lower graph, if we see that, if you also were to look at, like in the case of Himmatnagar, about 80% of the city already has sewer line laid. But if you see the connection coverage, it's as low as 25%. So people are really hesitating. They're not moving. They're not transitioning. Also talking about the whole, even once we set up this entire mechanism and this whole system, how is it going to really run itself? What about the operations and maintenance? And that's what is a big hindrance. The CPCB report on STPs clearly talks about why STPs fail because of lack of adequate human resources, adequately skilled and technical human resources, lack of adequate finances to run the STPs, lack of energy to run the STPs. So even if you look at the one-time sewer connection charges, the whole aspect, and it ranges from 120 to 1500. Again, no thought given to, and no tying it up to, you know, the kind of actually connection charges that are really the real connection charges that are required. And the same if you also look at the annual sewerage tax or the user charges that the city is charging, that's also not reflective of the fact that it's going to someday it has to run on its own. The O&M costs have to, it at least has to sustain itself financially. So if you also look at cost recovery figures of sewerage, it's very low. So the cost recovery, say for example, Dholka is 5%. If in Swachh Bharat mission, even if there is a lot of capex which comes in to set up all of this infrastructure, how is this system going to run itself? That is something that we really need to include as part of the design and implementation framework from day one. And that's something that we really need to think very strongly. This again varies across cities, but the collection efficiencies and the cost recoveries are abysmally low. And this is not typical only to Gujarat. I think this is a national phenomenon. I think we see cost recoveries are very low. It also comes back to the point that many times cities don't want to enhance the tax bases and the rates for the sewerage taxes, etc. There are many cities and states where sewerage tax itself is not, you know, laid. Coming to a quick study that we were doing in Patan, this was about 5 to 6 years back, and Patan had has had a very functional STP for many years, and we calculated the O&M expenses for the wastewater system and for the STP to run really well. It was close to 2 crores, 1.9 crore back then. And we were looking at that even if the city were to collect 100% of what its, you know, water taxes, of its wastewater taxes were, there was a huge gap in the sense of how it was going to sustain itself. And this gap is almost to the tune of a quarter. I mean, it's just, you know, even at 100% collection efficiencies, it was just generating 25% of what it would cost for the entire wastewater system to run and sustain itself. This again pointed to the fact that you needed to expand and enhance the existing tax base and increase the tax rates significantly. Even if you took all the city's surplus from all other sources, it still wasn't enough to meet the O&M expenditure for the wastewater system. And this is going to be typical for a lot of cities, and especially smaller cities more so. Kavita did talk about the whole impact that COVID has had on our cities. They've been further challenged to manage their own existing financial systems, and I think this is going to further push them to the brink. I think just now summarizing what we've really learned, I mean, in terms of even individual capacities at a city level, Gujarat being one of the more progressive state in terms of what it's been doing at an urban front, but we see that smaller cities, apart from Class A cities, I think small cities do not even have a separate sewerage department or a sanitation department, and hence there are no dedicated and qualified teams to really even look at the DPRs that are being prepared, to be part of it, and to negotiate what specific systems are you really wanting for your own cities. Those capacities really need to be built. Many of the Class C and D cities have one technical staff, one engineer who would be on a contractual position, and that person would be looking after everything, right from street lights, road supply, Awas Yojana to everything, right? So the individual capacities are a huge problem. The institutional capacities, again, ULBs continue to remain dependent for operations and maintenance on the state. In Gujarat, what we have seen is that the cities were not part of this entire planning design process at all, and hence there was a huge lack of ownership when the system is being handed over to the city. The cities are refusing to even take it up. So that whole engagement of urban local bodies from day one has to be enough, has to be there. I've already spoken of financial capacities and that we need to have better collection efficiencies, better rates, tax bases reflective of what it will take cities to run their operations and maintenance of the wastewater systems. So I think I'm going to leave with these following things. That one, we really need to look at, it's not possible for having technical staff at all cities, but can we look at pooled technical staffs? For example, Gujarat or many states have these regional commissioners, they have the divisional commissioner level, zonal setups. Can we think about having a really pooled technical staff at this level that can be deployed at the city level to help cities make better decision making? Massive IC efforts, and I think this is something that needs to be built into the design and implementation framework as well. And I think finally what I've been saying from the start of my presentation is that cities need to explore technical options which are very specific to what they have, the kind of challenges that they have and the kind of probably solutions also that they have, and they need to build on that. In Gujarat also what we have seen is that even the whole technology that has been deployed for STPs has been the same. All STPs are SBR based, irrespective of what's coming in. Now with the whole nalas and the whole grey water coming in, we really need to have that granular thing, the city specific focus coming in at all stages. So I think I'm going to stop here, and if there are any more questions, I'll be happy to answer that. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. We loved your presentation. Absolutely, Meghna. So thanks very much for your effort there. I think two things you have highlighted, if I just try to quickly summarize. The need for the ability for the population to pay for these sanitation services, and an overall transition from an on-site sanitation system to a sewer-based system. But if you look at the cost recovery, which is just about 25%. So how would you want us to react to it? Like in terms of, the working out a solution, which we should then be able to demonstrate to, other states, including, the nation, what shall be a solution out of it? Could you please quickly reflect on that? Thank you.
So one is the whole, so for example, we've also looked at the whole transition, right? So when we were looking at why are people not hooking up to these sewer lines, we looked at that the connection charges were a major deterrent, and there was no basis to what the connection charges the city was charging. So what many cities have done is they have made a bundled contract. So when the main sewer line is being laid, they've started bundling the contract of even giving household level connections in the same contract. So that's something that has been taken care of, and that connection charge is then offset in terms of, over a period of time. Many households might not be willing to pay it in one go, but if you offset it over, in the coming 2 years or so, it might become a little more comfortable for the household to pay up. So that's one. And the second, talking about the cost recovery itself, I think we really need to take a whole very total rejig at the way this is being looked at, the whole tax base and the whole, I think it's quite a challenge.
I would say it would be a whole webinar in itself.
Yeah, Sunil, you rightly said so, yeah. So over to our next panelist, Nidhi.
Hi, thank you so much.
Nidhi, I'll take about, maybe just about 30 seconds to put a framework or a question rather to which you can respond. Thanks, Nidhi. See, the government is likely to make all cities with less than 1 lakh population ODA++, and 50% of them as also water plus through SBM 2.0, as I said in the beginning itself. While adequate funding is a predominant aspect of any initiative, Another equally prime facet is, effective implementation of the initiative has to match the physical progress with financial progress. Therefore, what, according to you, are the ways in which wastewater treatment programs can be better implemented in terms of both? And what are the current gaps, if you feel there are any, and how can you overcome your own field experience? Over to Nidhi. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sanjeev, for even giving a context to what I'm about to share actually in my presentation. So I will address some of these questions, and my presentation is slightly lighter than the rest of everybody, and it builds up on the experiences that I have in the wash sector since about 14, 15 years, and it touches on various points that you mentioned. So it's really talks about that we need to get our shit together, and it's something that it's very, very urgent as of now. And what I'm stressing are on three things: that how can we really do it? And this is something that other speakers also spoke about, that one, we need a city-wide inclusive and a participatory sanitation system. And I break it down onto what does that mean. It means innovation is required. It might mean decentralization is required, especially in cities which have a population of less than 1 lakh. And it also means that we need to address it almost like a circular sanitation system. So there is no waste at the end of the day in this. And the second, which I think is very, very significant now, is to look at it as a sanitation economy and talk about green jobs. And this is where I feel there is a lot of opportunities, not just in terms of financing, but also in terms of the revenue generation that can happen through the sanitation as a sector. And the third, which Meghna also mentioned, that IEC needs to be done. There's a lot of work which needs to be done in the knowledge outreach and awareness. It's not just enough to make infrastructure, but the activities like you guys are doing today, hosting this kind of webinar, but doing this for specific stakeholders is what is required now. And in all of this, there are different kind of funders which come in. Government, of course, comes in. There's private sector, and the entire model of impact funding, if you may. It's an interesting one. There are private donors which are there, and of course citizenry in terms of O&M and other kind of initiatives. And I'll reflect on each of these points. Where does this, the money angle come in my slides? And also, this is something which a lot of people have covered. Now, if you look at the class 2 cities, they are primarily areas or cities where we're not dependent on sewer network. So they will definitely move towards FSSM. And one of the challenges which I feel is that we don't really know how to handle fecal sludge even now. So even though there are guidelines, if you may, or there are practices of handling fecal sludge, we don't really know how to do it. And it ends up like becoming another manual scavenging act. And it also encourages open defecation. So what is it that we can do? We can definitely have decentralized systems, we can have innovations, and we need to think of it in terms of urban-rural continuum. Like in the beginning, Sanjeev, you spoke about that a lot of them are also, towns which are going in the Gram Sabha land. So there is definitely a connect between the urban and the rural, and we need to see sanitation as a value chain within that, I feel. So, this image, I think many of us in the sanitation sector have seen many times. So a truck full of sludge is disposed not in a proper way. So which is better in that case, open defecation or something like this? This is way more harmful. So, so I vary about our readiness towards addressing fecal sludge in our cities as of now, even though we know that the smaller towns cannot and even should not have a large, investment-linked sewer network. So what do we do? And here I'm giving an example of a pilot that an organization that I've associated with called Greha, we did in Ayanagar in an urban village of Delhi that has a population of 1 lakh, almost like any other town. And here we tried a pilot for, working with the smaller block. We broke the settlement in small blocks. So this was done for the Z block. And we worked with a very unique technology developed by DRDO the biodigesters. So there is not a fecal sludge coming out of it. There are only residues which can actually be used and taken down to the reed bed for the secondary treatment in this biodigester kind of a system. So you don't really need to pump out occasionally. You don't need to handle it, as typical FSSM value chains need to be do. And it's a system like this where, we installed these biodigesters and we install them in the pathway. And the idea of also putting it in the pathway and not individual toilets was that they almost become like a manhole, connecting 3-4 households. And then, the primary treatments happen. And then there is a network which then connects you to the last secondary treatment, which happens in the reed bed. Now, this is the reed bed. And I would like to mention that here, this project was funded by DUSIG. It was like a 2 crore project. And, but, we were very interested that the community takes ownership in this. And we developed something, or we established a Vikas Samiti in Ayanagar. During this course of entire project, there was a young guy of the Z block itself who's now become a municipal councillor. He's very, very dynamic. And you can see him. This is an event which he hosted where he was getting the community paint, on the reed bed, or a mural on the reed bed. And this reed bed is at the local pond. So the idea is also, and then he's developed a nice walkway around the local pond, clean the local pond. And, so there is a lot of engagement which is coming from the people. Now that the project has just finished, what we are battling is exactly what Meghna mentioned about O&M. Who pays for the O&M now onwards, right? Will community pay? Now in a place like this, which is, unregulated or unregularized colonies or an urban village, are they willing to pay? And that is what we are negotiating with them right now, because the government would not undertake O&M throughout. And this is, I think, the key question that on sustainability of a lot of our infrastructure projects lies on operation and management, rather than just the first level of investment in the infrastructure. Now, the second one, which I wanted to touch is the concept of the circular economy, how the sludge can be reused in different operations for agriculture, for aquaculture, and various other things. And I'm just showing an example from, so we had Vishwanath do a presentation for us, and he gave an example of how the urban and the rural have been linked together in this settlement near Bangalore, where the sludge is being given to mulberry farmers. So earlier they were growing another crop, and they realized that people are not interested in edible crops which are which are produced because of fecal sludge. So they transferred their crop into be a mulberry crop. And what you have now are silkworms. And it became a very, very interesting project, because it was benefit for the farmer. The government is funding something like this, and these are the kind of partnerships or collaboration which can happen between in a PPP format, and it can be advantageous. And we again need to think of urban rural as a value chain, and not something just segregated like the Pinderji showed in the first diagram, that there is a core and you manage everything there. It doesn't work like that, especially in small towns. The second aspect I want to touch, and this is something which Meghna mentioned about capacity building of the ULB, but I'm touching a wider perspective. And in fact, we worked a lot with UMC in this, and this is while I was in NSDC, in terms of how do you skill for these jobs? What is the sanitation economy which is there? And you can just see the numbers, it is huge. But why are we not taking advantage of something like this? And so this is just an example of, let's say, in a liquid waste management operations, what all kind of jobs are available. Jobs is something that we're always discussing, employment and demographic dividend. Here is a sector which can offer you a lot of opportunities. And from the construction state to an O&M state, to looking at his business opportunities, becoming an entrepreneur. And for all of this, we realize that we don't have enough skills. For example, the masons, they did not know how to make a twin pit toilet system, right? So that was another kind of what we call in skilling terminologies, a qualification pack or a job role, which was made to skill masons to be able to make a twin pit toilet system. Now, there are many such, these kind of job roles which one realize are required, and we need to train people in these. And this is something, in fact, which Urban Management Center itself worked with Green Job Sector Skill Council and NSDC. And we kind of try to analyze that, where are the jobs in this? This one is for FSSM. So there are so many jobs in access and containment, in emptying and conveyance, in treatment and disposal. Do we really have people trained to manage something like this? And this became the precursor and the questions that we are doing. And they developed what we call an occupation map, is to understand where people are required, what kind of training is required. So those are called levels. And that translated into these points 28 to 34, these kind of job roles which are now made. And we are training people in these job roles, right? So biomass depot operator, or many other job roles which have come up in FSSM also. So these kind of job roles are made, and you converge with different ministries, different programs, different donor programs to actually train people for these. Similarly, right now, in fact, we are also working with the Jal Jeevan Mission and trying, the entire integrated wash program. And for O&M especially, this one is at the Gram Sabha level we are working right now, but another program we are working even in the urban area for an integrated wash. Can you have something like, these are called, it's a Jal Doot, what we are calling as a qualification. And in fact, Piramal Foundation, which is another way how a private sector can collaborate, has worked with us to develop a qualification around it. It's called a last mile cadre. So a plumber knows a little bit of construction work, also knows how to do grey water management. So knows little of all the things which are required in delivering this. Because usually what you get a plumber at home, he does not know how to make a wall. He'll say, "Aap zara, mistri ko bulao." That doesn't work when you have to actually do O&M. You need somebody who is multi-skilled. So we're developing these kind of specific job roles. Now, at a larger level, what other initiatives I think has to be done is in terms of knowledge, outreach, and awareness. And this is something, for example, I had made for Priya on inclusive urban sanitation, which is being delivered to larger group and audience. Like yourself, I have also conducted under SERI a lot of communication campaigns and outreach on urban sanitation, and I'm just showing an example of that. And in the last one, this is the last slide, it's very important because this is what we did with schools. We worked with around 50 schools, and one of the topics was urban sanitation. And how do you introduce those topics to the lay people and youth and children including? So that's it for me. And I think that, it's not what I said in the beginning. I think it's a continuous process. It needs to be seen not just as a one-time infrastructure investment, but we need to look at this as entire partnership and a very participatory kind of a way. And the three ways that I said in terms of being innovative with the solution that you have, in skilling adequately and doing knowledge outreach and awareness and getting private sector and public sector together is what I would believe is a solution. That's it from me, Sanjeev.
Thanks, Nidhi. One quick question. I know that, because I have myself visited the plant, so I know that it is being successfully run for quite some time now. I think more than 2 years, if I'm not wrong. And it's also catering to approximately around 200 plus households in the Z block of Ayanagar, which is, a colony in South Delhi, bordering Gurgaon. And I also know that, that almost around 50,000 liters of treated wastewater the system is able to generate. So I'd like to know from you as to why the intervention has not been replicated, at least in the the other blocks of Ayanagar itself, in case there is a need, or any other parts of Delhi until now. And why is that government is reluctant to support the distribution of that treated wastewater back to the household? Maybe it's probably because no regulations exist as of now for the treatment of wastewater as such. So you can quickly reflect on that, and then I'm also announcing the beginning of the Q&A session with this question of mine. Mitali, is it all right?
Yes, we most of the answers have been already taken up.
So yeah.
Great. Yes, Sanjeev. You're right. So this is one pilot which was done in the A block, so in the Z block, but another pilot we've done in A block also. And that's a slightly different system in which actually we installed biodigester in the toilets itself. Now, what we realized with that experience was that it was much easier because everybody has a different kind of a toilet system. It was much easier to have this as a manhole between 3 and 4 houses, and then work with this network, which is like a smaller network and not a large network in all practical sense. Your second question of why it has not scaled up, or why is the Delhi government not interested? I think they're becoming more interested in it now. Like you visited, many other Delhi government officials have also visited the site. There are challenges in terms of delivering back the treated water to the households. One, it's an urban village. Now what we've realized over time is that, waste or of animal dung is getting mixed, because there's suddenly one house which has, let's say, 10 buffaloes which they have got. Now this is not something that you planned, that your sewer network also needs to take care of animal waste. Now these are very very unique challenges, and I'm sure even a small town would face something like that, which means that, is the BOD level accurate? Is the treated level of water accurate? So in the reed bed still it can go, but can we consume it back to the water? That's still, these are very practical things that we are dealing with right now there.
Thank you. So one question from the audience for Deepinder sir. Non-performance of STP is an issue, and how it has been dealt with in the draft guidelines that you talked about. It is mostly due to high energy costs, and I'm asking on behalf of that participant. That makes operational cost very high. So please could you share the reasons for non-performance of existing STPs in India?
I think both Kavita and Meghna alluded to this fact of non-performance, and Nidhi also showed it in the slides which we presented. As far as the guidelines go, they are talking of new schemes. So naturally, guidelines are very specific program guidelines. So they don't discuss issues in great detail. So therefore, the guidelines don't talk about the challenges there. They only talk about setting up new SPPs and the new projects. So I answer that also.
So there is one question.
Yeah, please, Mitali, go ahead.
So there is one question for Nidhi. Sorry, it is answered, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I just said that they are asking the BOD level of the treated water. Yeah. It's 14. Yeah, so I just replied to Kamal.
I have a question.
Sunil, please go ahead. Thank you.
Kavita, and perhaps the rest can also take. So Kavita, when we look at the private sector engagement, especially in terms of finances, like, whether if and when they come in, especially for the O&M, because I was also talking to your team members, right? One thought was, in order to promote co-composting, it would be good to look at the output, the byproduct of that co-composting as a revenue source of revenue stream. I understand at a town level of a less than 1 lakh population, the quantities would be very less. Like, for example, in Pune, I looked at one of the STPs of 30 MLD. They had roughly around 1.5 tons of sludge that they had. So obviously the quantities are less. But the way you had the cluster model, something similar could be looked at for the byproduct from towns close by, and then the quantities would bulk up, because if it is looked at as a source of revenue, then there is more interest for the operator also to go for co-composting. And then for that to happen, also we need to look at standardizing the byproduct, because currently the guidelines are such that there has to be 0 pathogens. And with 0 pathogens, it's as good as dead. There's nothing, right? So somebody has to talk to FCO and do that. So how are you as the technical support unit? I mean, I'm asking you as in not you as per se, but all the grantees of the Gates Foundation handling different states. So how do you think as IIHS you could push forward this agenda?
So I have a working answer, because as most of the FSTPs, just to give context, have been constructed in last maybe 3 years. So many of them have been operational for maybe a year or so, some more than. So for Devanhalli, for example, which was one of the oldest, has tried co-composting, but I'm very wary of putting out the numbers in terms of pricing because we yet to do that price discovery. But when we did an initial kind of study with farmers in Coimbatore, which is a very water scarce region, right? So where we found a great willingness for farmers to pay for the recycling water, right? For sludge, like you were saying, there were doubts about what is the nutrition value. There is stigma attached to it. So so one is that has to be overcome. So there are a whole lot of issues. Second, in terms of how much of the cost will it meet? Our analysis shows, which is all, you know, numbers that we have kind of worked out talking to people and the buyers, it's not going to cover more than maybe 5 to 10% of your costs. So I think one is, one is, you know, whatever is the stigma. Second, like you said, standardization. So there is a set of things we need to do to enable this to happen, because this is important not only from a financing point of view or money generation point of view, but also the point of view of making it work and closing the loop. It will meet a small percentage only is what we are saying. If we can meet more, it's great. And what, at least in Tamil Nadu, what we propose to the government, we don't know whether it will be taken up, is to actually say that what is coming from reuse should be an incentive to the private sector operator. So you do a base costing, which is like covering the base cost of the operation. And if you actually manage to make money out of reuse, let that be an incentive, because that's the only way we feel it'll work. So I think we'll have to wait and watch the space as FSTPs actually generate that and go through that cycle of co-composting.
Sure. So on that note, Sanjeev, what would be also interesting is to look at the fertilizer chain in the FICCI setup to see how they work to reach out to the last stage of the farmers, you know, also to address these things. So there are multiple level of things that need to be looked at. So perhaps I'll connect with you separately on this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kavita.
Thanks so much. I think we are a little behind the schedule, so may I request the audience to please put your questions in the chat box.
There is one question.
There are a couple of them. Yeah, Mitali, you can ask maybe one more, and then we'll proceed with the rest of
So there's one question that Kavita would like to answer. For urban villages or in secondary towns or peri-urban areas, could decentralized treatment plants be seen as an option?
Mitali, I meant to type the answer instead of taking time here, but since you've asked 30 seconds, I think, Abhishek, that's possible. But we have to look at the institutional arrangements and we have to look at space. So urban villages, which are typically dense, you may or may not have space. Peri-urban, I'm imagining you would have space. So land requirement will become a very big thing. So sorry about that, Mitali.
Thanks. Yeah, great. Yeah. So audience, thanks for making this discussion so enriching. So I'll request you to please put your questions in the chat box, and we assure you as organizers that we are certainly going to address them. And we propose to have a synthesis out from this discussion. So all of it is actually going to be included there. So thanks very much. And Mitali, if I can hand over to Kirti ji for the summing up.
Yes.
And concluding remarks. Over to Kirti ji. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. It's such a rich discussion and conversation. I don't necessarily have anything to kind of summarize. I just wanted to make a small point, which has benefited me, us very much. I think, this is the 56th webinar that we're doing on rethinking Indian cities. And I'm very glad that there is specifically touch with the small and medium towns, cities lesser than 100,000 people, and also a very specific subject, that's sanitation. And I think that has been a real departure for us, and because we're talking largely on the macro issues, and therefore this was very different and very useful. And I think we are still wanting to do many more webinars, and I think this provides a very interesting direction for the webinars themselves. So thank you very much, India Sanitation Coalition, for this direction that you've given us. All I want to do is to really thank everyone who has spent time. So thank you very much, Natasha ji, for making this possible. As I was telling you in the beginning, we have been working on this for the last 9 months, and the very fact that it has happened now, and it's been so rich. So thank you very much. Thank you also, Mitali ji, I think, for very careful, I think, processing of the process, and it's been exceedingly useful. Thank you very much, Jasa, I think, for a very deft handling of the webinar. Lots of hard work, obviously, thought about, came with questions, preparation, very much appreciated for someone as senior as you are. This subject is on your fingertips, so thank you very much. And then, of course, remarkably interesting panel for this educative, insightful, informative analysis and presentation of diverse issues. And I must thank each one individually, Dapinder Bhai, Kavita ji, Rashtan, whose left I understand, Meghna ji, and of course Nidhi. Nidhi ji, I must preempt this a bit. Nidhi ji should be here with few more webinars on the new subject she is working with. That's on the construction workers and women in construction skills. We would probably have 2 or 3 more webinars on the subject pretty soon. But thank you very much, remarkable. I also must thank my colleague and friend Sunil Agarwal for helping to put this together. He's taken a huge amount of responsibility for doing this, and also introducing the webinar series very well today. I must thank my colleague Ankita for background work, for logistics, for outreach and other work that she does. Is a very hard worker, and because of she, we will hardly come across any major problem on this. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, India Sanitation Coalition, again, for this cooperation and conducting this webinar very well. Thank you very much.
I think 2 people are absolutely essential here for the smooth running of it. One is Mitali from ISC and Ankisha from INHAF. Thank you.
Absolutely. Huge congratulations to them and great work. We are deeply appreciative. Thank you so much, Mitali, and thank you so much, Ankisha.
Thanks.